of teamwork, navigating conflict, and group dynamics. I am a religious educator with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And I will begin this webinar with an opening prayer, which I felt was appropriate for the topic. I've excerpted a prayer attributed to St. Francis. So please join me in prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Amen. It is my delight and pleasure to introduce Michelle Ennis, who is the Executive Director of the Tri-County Mediation. And Michelle has extensive experience in mediation and training others about mediation and conflict management. She was also the former Director of Mediation and Training at Bosserman Center for Conflict Resolution at Salisbury University. So thank you, Michelle, for taking the time to be with us on this learning lab and assisting our green teams in how they can navigate conflict, communicate more effectively, and take action as a result. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. My heart is absolutely in the world of activism, and I have a family that is well grounded in environmentalism. And it's interesting, when I started my life as an activist at a very early age. Actually, my first protest, I think, was at the age of 5, directly across from the Catholic Church, where some developer had the audacity to come up with a plan to build townhouses in the field that was our just open, free space where we would play for hours as children. And so we made signs, and we protested bulldozers. Hickory Hill townhouses now sit there, so you can see how effective a campaign it was. But as I continued in my work for a lot of years, both in fair housing and no nukes and a variety of pieces, as a pacifist, I started to realize that part of what I thought needed to happen was that people who were in direct opposition with one another were writing each other off. Like, we would lose our voices as activists. And that if we were going to shift things forward, there would still be needs for direct action, but there also needed to be space for really tough conversations where people could hear underneath and what was important to people, and find ways for all of those realities to be true at the same time. I am the mother of 6 kids, and I come from a big, crazy Irish Catholic family. So I also have profound awareness of how important it is for us to navigate conflict and maintain relationships. And so I made a shift into mediation and facilitation, which is not to say that I don't still hold strong opinions. I'm a person of very strong opinions, but I also have chosen not to be silent in terms of being complicit towards injustice, but to be able to use my voice so that other voices get heard. And it's part of what I want to talk about today, the piece of collaborative communication. Because I think part of what can happen is when we are so impassioned and we are so certain that the way we are headed forward is necessary, it can be tough for people to hear us when they have something else to share. So one of the big basic pieces that we talk about with it is collaborative communication. But first, and people will hear this like as active listening, and it's different than active listening, but the piece on, we call it inclusive listening. And it means being able to really work on understanding what people are saying, no matter what they're saying. And so with that, we start with a distancing phrase. And that would be what I think I'm hearing you say. So it sounds like, so is that about? And it sets this tone that says we're working on understanding, that we are not becoming the authority on something, but we're also not just not agreeing. It doesn't mean that you have to agree or disagree with someone. And then saying back what we hear folks saying. As we're saying back, I'm listening. And this is one of the ways it's really helpful if I wildly disagree with someone. I'm listening for feelings, values, and topics. And when I'm listening for feelings, it's not what I assume someone might in that position might be feeling, but it's what I actually hear someone expressing. So if someone says, I had no idea you were even going to do that. How could you? And I'm saying, and it sounds like you felt stunned and kind of blown away. Exactly. So it starts to naturally de-escalate the situation, right? I will caution you, reflecting back, frustrated and angry are so generic, it can actually make it worse. So while I will advise reflecting back a feeling, I'm going to say the F word and the A word, and I specifically mean frustrated and angry. Steer clear of those because it also doesn't have the specificity that you need. And if we don't get it right, if we're not reflecting back with the intensity that someone's expressing and it's not accurate enough, people are going to think, I need to really, they're not getting me. Let me pump up the volume. Let me get a little more colorful in the way that I'm saying this to really impress it upon us. And so then someone's at Mach 10. The other piece is, and this one's huge, being able to hear the values that someone's expressing, even in highly positional statements, right? You are disgusting. You never do anything that you ever say you're going to do, and you leave everyone out. It's like you think that you died and became king. For us to be able to say, no, the feelings, anybody can jump in. What are some of the feelings you heard in that? You can unmute people if you want, Kolya, so they can say.
Anybody unmute yourself? Yeah. Anybody?
Resentment.
Don't be shy.
So resentment, and we need to be careful. Who said that?
Thelma said that.
Thelma, thank you, Thelma. Now be careful because this technique, we're not becoming an evaluator, right? And we're not like assigning it as blame. Like it's not a therapeutic role. So we're sending the message that we're trying to understand. So you could say, sounds like you're feeling resentful, right? Not like apparently you have resentment. So I'm just cautioning it, right? That there's a different posture of that compassionate curiosity versus a more judgmental, evaluative approach. So excellent. So it sounds like you're feeling resentful and looking for like, what is important to that person? If they're saying you never include anybody, you don't do what you say you're going to do, it's like you think that you became king. What's important to that person?
Inclusion.
Excellent. Excellent. So what I think I'm hearing you say is feeling resentful and really looking for inclusion. Is that right? It's huge, right? Like that piece, even if I'm like, what? Oh my gosh, it's breaking up. This person is losing it, right? I don't have to be focused on that part. I'm sending the message that I'm working on understanding. And so it starts to naturally de-escalate. But the other cool thing about it is then we know that inclusion is going to be one of the goals moving forward. The other thing I'm listening for are topics. And topics are typically one word, tangible items. It definitely needs to be something that folks have mentioned they're struggling with, or even that they're excited about, that they want to work on. And we need to make sure that it isn't something that is telling people what they should or shouldn't do. It's not already automatically deciding it, and it doesn't take anybody's side. So for example, if we had an agenda for our meeting and we were concerned because some people arrived on time and some people were late, so we would want to be careful if we were talking about it that we wouldn't want to say timely, respectful attendance, right? Because that's absolutely judging, We're judging. And they're the people, like, if I was trying to feed my kids, if some calamity happened with work, if I was feeling sick and I took medicine, I was hoping it was going to kick in and I was going to be better. I'm feeling radically misunderstood. I'm coming in feeling defensive. But if we were to name it schedule, and then one of the values was timeliness, right? Then we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. So we're listening for feelings, values, and topics. And then the next thing, I can listen to someone and I can say back what I think I'm hearing using a distancing phrase. What I think I'm hearing you say is feeling resentful and looking for inclusion when it comes to decision making. And then I shift on. And the person is thinking, that's kind of it, but not really. If I don't stop and use a check-in phrase and say, is that right? Did I get that all? So that they have a chance to clarify and say, well, kind of. But it's not so much about decisions. I mean, it's really about plans that we already made and projects that we're all supposed to be working on together. I mean, that's what we said we were doing. But then one person just takes over. And so it sounds like really feeling offended and also confused when there is a plan, and really looking for consistency and follow through and a collaborative effort when you're working on projects. Is that right? Exactly. So you've then maintained, by just using the check-in phrase, you don't have to have your reflection be perfect, and you've still maintained that trust and credibility as a listener. And people have a chance to clarify. Now, if this is all that we ever do in life, if all we're doing is working on understanding what other folks are saying, it does mean that it's going to be challenging if we never get to share where we're coming from, where the other folks at the table never get to. So the balance is in collaborative communication, because if we only did the first piece I'm talking about consistently, we'd kind of be in an accommodating posture. So there are 5 basic approaches: avoid, accommodate, compete, compromise, collaborate. Today we're highlighting collaborative communication. And so as facilitators, we may want to just be accommodating, working on understanding, so that the other people involved together can collaborate. But if we are supposed to have voice in it as well, then it means that then we have a chance to be able to share and do the same thing. But the great thing about this skill of listening for feelings, values, and topics is we can use it on ourselves. When I'm driving, when I'm in the shower, those moments when I'm in my quiet space, but not quiet in my head, stewing about something. If I can take the time to think about what are the feelings and the values and the topics, and it means I kind of give myself permission to have the rant or the vent in my head, but then I listen to myself with feelings, values, and topics, so that it sets me up so that I can speak in a way where I stand a better chance of being heard, right? And say, after I've reflected back and checked in and saying, you know, and the thing about projects, I do hear the piece about wanting there to be collaboration and follow through. And I am feeling kind of misunderstood, because part of it is I thought we had all said that we were going to get it taken care of by a certain time. And I was concerned about the reputation of our organization moving forward if we didn't respond. So I went ahead and did it, even though I hadn't heard from everyone. And I'd like us to figure out a way moving forward. But I was really feeling protective for all of us and maintaining that credibility. So that way it sets us up to be able to be heard differently, instead of, well, if you'd done what you said you were going to do, we wouldn't have this problem, would we? Or not saying anything and holding the resentment. The other piece that I wanted to cover within that is something we call the rule of 2. So I've been doing this work for well over half of my life at this point. And I was sitting, we developed a statewide organization that I'm going to talk with you more about shortly, that is a collection of community mediation centers across the state of Maryland. And so we, you know, we're buggers who offer collaborative processes. We train in collaboratively based processes. And we caught ourselves coming out of a couple of board meetings where we were frustrated with someone on our board, and I could hear us doing the, oh my gosh, can you even believe? I mean, what is she thinking? Why is she like that? It's so difficult. She's so difficult. And we were like, holy crap, we're doing it. We're doing what we say. And so we really had to call ourselves and be reflective and walk our talk. And we developed something called the rule of two. And the rule of two means when we are upset with someone, when we're having a tough time. So if I'm upset with Thelma, I'm going to pick on you since you beautifully offered to volunteer. If I have come out of a meeting and I am just fit to be tied with Thelma, and I turn to Phil, now I'm pulling you into the mix. I'm implicating you. Get ready. And so then I'm like, Phil, what's up with Thelma? I mean, seriously, is she always this difficult? Because that was painful, honestly. And Phil might be like, well, I mean, I don't know if she was difficult. I mean, I think she feels strongly about it. But I know you also, like, you've got a lot on your plate right now, Michelle. And you mentioned when you came in that you hadn't eaten. So like, I know I can get temperamental when I haven't eaten, maybe. And I'm like, okay, clearly Phil is not feeling me. So I go to Mary. And now I'm like, oh, Mary, what's up with little miss? Could you believe Thelma? She's a piece of work, right? Am I right? And Mary's like, oh my gosh, I was totally thinking the same thing. What is going on with her? So now I've had this initial conflict that I have that I'm not even addressing with Thelma. But now I'm trying to sway public opinion. I'm growing it. I'm actively growing this conflict and making it bigger and an alternate conflict. So the rule of two is this. We get one person, right, that we turn to. Now it's going to make me choose wisely. Also, if I know that some people are going to just like fan the flame and be my yes person, they might not be my best person to go to, right? If I know that they're the people who are good counsel, whom I can trust, who are like, they're going to support me, but they're also going to call me on my crap. Like, that's a great person to go to, who's like, well, maybe, but maybe this, I don't know. And I can talk it through, my safe space, and they're not going to go and tell other people. And it may be that I go to Phil, I talk with him, and he helps me. I'm like, you know what? You're right. My blood sugar has dropped off, and I'm stressed. And she was passionate, and I've been passionate before. Maybe I can honestly let it go. However, if it is still stuck in my craw, if I am still feeling deeply about it, and I need to talk about it a second time, that person needs to be Thelma. The rule of two means if I need a second person, I need to go back directly to the person with whom I'm struggling and say, I had a tough time coming out of that, and I am not sure what was going on. I'd like to hear more from you. And I'd like to explain a little bit about how it landed for me. And you set the stage for being able to have a collaborative conversation. Going back to the pieces that we were just talking about of when you hear from that person, really letting them talk without interrupting, right? We let them say all of what they're going to say. We don't jump in, even if we're utterly disagreeing. We hear all of it. And then we say back what we heard, using feelings, values, topics, and the check-in phrase.
Just let me know, Michelle, if you want me to advance to the next slide.
I was about to say that, Kolya. You could feel it. Way to go.
Great. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
So some of the overviews. Oh, my little thing doesn't show when the pictures are there. Okay. So this is a basic overview in terms of conflict management. If we were doing an 8-hour training, I would cover all of the different strategies in each of these pieces. But this is our basic roadmap, right? Talking with people, not about people.
Yeah, I know each one does have an animation, so I can pop them up.
Listen to, oh no, go back.
Oh, sorry. Back up. Sorry about
Listening. listening to what other people have to say and making sure that making sure we understand what's important to them. That's the piece we were talking about, of trying to hear the values, right? Not necessarily like, here's this position, here's this position. Also, when I say be clear about what you want from the situation, it's not just when I say get up, right? So it sounds like responsiveness is important to you. That's what's important about the situation, not the exact directive of the position. Saying what you feel in a way that's respectful. Now, we all can have different versions of respect. In my family, someone respecting you means they're going to be straight up. It might be very colorfully worded, but that's going to feel like respect. To someone else, it's not going to be. So it also depends on with whom we're talking. I think respectful also means, am I giving the space? Am I holding space for someone else? And am I giving them a chance to understand where I'm coming from? And the questions for clarification, right? Instead of, so is it true that you, but backing it up and saying, help me understand. Can you tell me more about? And separating people from the problem. So identifying topics is going to be a huge piece in this, instead of the problem of Kolya is, right? Being able to say, this thing about emails, Kolya, it doesn't work for me like that, right? So then we're talking about emails, not Kolya. Looking for solutions that work for everyone. And that comes out of listening to everybody getting to talk and hearing what's important, the responsiveness, the flexibility, and the follow through, right? Hearing those goals, depending on our topic. And when positions look incompatible, looking at those underlying needs. And the other piece is, whether it is large group, small group, try mediation. We don't have to be ready to punch one another in the throat or take something to court to try mediation. It's free. It's free across the state for you. Can you show the next slide, Kolya?
Yep.
There are 15 community mediation centers across the state, some of them serving multiple counties. There are professionally trained volunteer mediators through all of those centers. So if you, your group, your organization, or individuals would like support, having supported conversations, which can be really important. If you have ideas to share and you're the facilitator, we can set ourselves up at a disadvantage if we try to both wear a couple of hats. If we're trying to facilitate and weigh in on ideas, because if we hold back and wait to the end to let other people have a chance to talk, okay, all the possible ideas, no bad ideas, and then at the very end we share, people can think, oh, she knew what she wanted to do all along. She just strung us along and acted like she wanted our ideas. It can be really helpful to have a facilitator support those conversations, and people give it as their gift, as their service to one another. I think there's another piece under that has the contact information for Community Mediation Maryland. So here's the website, mdmediation.org, and then their phone number. But if you go to this website, you can locate the Community Mediation Center near you. And I will say there's work right now, my center at Tri-Community Mediation. We serve Wycomico, Worcester, and Somerset counties. So we receive referrals from two friends wanting to start a business, people who had kids together. They didn't make it work, but they still have to figure out field trips and birthdays. But we also recently, 5.5 months ago, started looking at folks who experienced a lot of barriers generally in life. And then in the face of COVID, what the heck was life going to look like? And people were dying, and numbers were going up. So we brought together folks from administrators from poultry plants, as well as people who work the line. And we brought together people in the school system, as well as people who are trying to have their kids be in the school system, and Haitian members of the community and Latinx members of the community. And we've had this phenomenal conversation that now, I facilitate every Wednesday morning a conversation for 60 plus people. And there are 10 different work groups out of that. One that's focusing on language, one that's focusing on education, one that's focusing on healthcare access, on food. So there's the short-term solutions people are coming up with and the larger systemic pieces. So it can be used for, it's not just interpersonal conflict, it can absolutely be used to support more transparent, engaged dialogue and more creative solutions.
Yeah.
I saw someone in the chat ask about DC. Yes, Caroline Cragen, whom I love, who used to work at Community Mediation Maryland, started Community Mediation DC, and she is outstanding. I can't say enough good things about her.
That's great. I have to say, getting in touch with you and learning more about this network has really been an eye-opener to me, because it turns out there's one of our supporters who's not able to join us tonight because she's attending a mediators meeting in Baltimore. That she's a volunteer mediator herself.
Well,
so.
She's actually being honored. She's
Yeah.
actually being honored. I had said yes to you all before the date. It's our volunteer mediator celebration tonight from 7 to 8:30. We usually have a gala where we honor our volunteers. So I sent my photos and videos celebrating our volunteers. And when we wrap up, I'll jump on for the last few minutes of it to honor and celebrate them. But yeah, that's very cool.
Well, bless your heart for taking our invitation, and I hope you have some time at the end to join them. So
they know I'm doing the work as well. They know.
That's great. Well, if without any further ado, are you ready, Michelle, for us to open it up for some more general questions and examples of other situations people may have?
That would be great.
Open up here. So,
and if you want to open it up to the full gallery so we can all see one another, that would be awesome.
Yeah, everyone should be able to do that themselves, right?
I think if you're screen sharing, it still does a compressed gallery.
Well, I can turn off the screen share and go back to that in a minute. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Give that a try.
Yay, there we all are.
Thanks, Michelle. Just learned a new tech trick. So, anyone would like to share an example or a challenge of either working within your team or perhaps beyond within the congregation? I have a couple of examples in my pocket, but I want to open it up for folks to share what you're dealing with.
Hi, Nancy.
Nancy, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I have an example. It's actually not with my congregation. It's with an organization outside of this group that I'm representing tonight. But I just thought I would share it because it came up this week and it's quite timely. So it's something we're still struggling with, although I think we're coming to some common ground, but it has to do with COVID. Actually, I'm part of another organization in which the demographic is part of the more vulnerable population with COVID. And this group tends to help out with some public service events that have been canceled, like races and things like that, like running races and bike races, and supports events like that that aren't happening, but now are starting to happen again. And so we've had some disagreement as to whether our organization should go ahead and support, knowing that our members tend to be older and potentially part of the more vulnerable population. So it's been a real hot topic, to be honest, on our board, just because some people are ready to go and just think it will all be fine. This came up in the summer. Let me note that when COVID we didn't understand as much as we know about it. People weren't going out as often. So at that point as a board, we had decided not to do any of our volunteer activities at that time. Now as a board, we're starting to revisit it again, but I'll tell you, the board was very split about it and it was quite contentious. So it was very difficult for us to come up with some common ground because people felt so strongly about it. So I just wanted to share that as an example because it came up again this week as we're reconsidering how we will continue supporting events like that in the future, and how we can kind of keep everybody at least a little bit happy and also keep our members safe. So it's been
thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think right now, any of the challenges that we already have totally amplified. Totally, any social injustice amplified, any challenge, and then there's just the piece of the worry, and then it's just tiresome as well. Like we're worn out, right? And so I think part of it is like as you're talking, like I'm listening, like I'm consistently doing it, right? I'm like, oh, so the topic would be activities, and just from what you said, like it sounds like feeling torn, like wanting to be able to find something that really works for everybody, and feeling worried about like the impact it's going to have on the group. And some of the concerns it sounds like you have are around health and safety, and then also really wanting to honor this space of like engagement, and a sense of community and connectedness. Is that right? And so part of what would happen would be like having a facilitator who would be able to do what I just said to you, right? And then running a brainstorm, and with no dog in the race, right? But to be able to say, and earlier when you were talking about activities, it sounded like you were looking for space where you could feel folks would be safe, with a focus on health and that sense of engagement. What are some ideas that you have? And then running that brainstorm. And I think a lot of us do brainstorming, but I think a lot of us have experienced really crappy brainstorming, right? Like where somebody's like running the brainstorm and we're like, no bad ideas. All the ideas can go up. And someone's like, well, how about if we, and they're like, oh no, we tried that before, it didn't work. But no bad ideas. Keep them coming. Well, maybe we could. We don't have money in the budget for that. But what else, right? And we're shooting people down. Like we've experienced it, and then the facilitator goes, well, I didn't want to say this because I wanted to give you guys some space, but maybe we could. And like I said before, they're like, oh, she totally knew what she wanted to do the whole time, and people feel ripped off, right? Like they've been mishandled. And so I really would recommend being able to either decide, have a dedicated person. I mean, it's free. You guys have access to community mediation centers all over who are highly trained, who spend so much time working on this. So giving it a shot. Or we can also, there's conflict coaching. Like you could call like this, like the conversation you're having with me, where I could say, well, this is what it sounds like your topics list is, and this is what I'm hearing are some of the goals. Maybe approach it from that vantage point, to give people a lift, and that's available as well.
Super. Thank you so much.
Sure. Absolutely.
I feel like a check should be in the mail to you. You hit it all right on the head.
We take donations. Try community mediation. We take donations. So feel free.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
so
Nancy.
much.
Thanks, Nancy, for sharing that. That is a good example. Anybody else? Yeah, Cynthia.
I just have a question about process. There are some people who don't think in terms or speak in terms of feelings. They always say thinking. I'm thinking versus feeling. In the process, what has been your experience in dealing with people who talk in terms of what they're thinking as opposed to what they're feeling?
It's a great question. And people don't have to say, here's what I'm feeling for us to hear the feelings. And I feel like it comes up a lot in like business kind of settings. People are like, this is just the law. This is just matter of fact. But even to that, like, well, it's clear that the law says, right? And I'm thinking that what needs to happen next is, and that we can say, and it sounds like you feel confident, and like there's real clarity. Can you walk us through the pieces of the law that where you feel supported and where you feel like this is gives you the clarity that you're referencing, and it still opens up the conversation and people still feel heard, right? It still can have that de-escalation. So it's not, I think when I say feelings, people assume it in more of a like emotional, touchy-feely, or like high intensity, and it doesn't have to be. People can sound cool as a cucumber, and there's still feelings in that. But it also means really expanding our feeling word vocabulary. One thing I tell newly trained mediators to do, like I kind of was one of those kill your television kind of people, handing out the kill your television bumper stickers. So I'm not really a big TV person, but there is so much really terrible TV out there that supports learning in this regard. Like you can watch, what are the shows? Come on, Matthew, help me out here. Jerry Springer, Not because I think Matt watches them, but I'm just thinking he would know. And I know Matt. That's why. I just made it sound like you're like one of those TV dudes. Okay. Like Jerry Springer, Judge Judy, any of the really Dr. Phil. Oh my gosh. Maury Povich, anything basically, if there's a paternity test, it is prime for you to be able to learn this skill set. Okay. The more people are like screaming, hollering, accusing, you can start to listen for feelings, values, topics, and imagine the stuff where you're like, these people are crazy, right? It really shifts you out of that judgment into this space of working on understanding. And I have to say, the reward is huge in giving this gift because your capacity for compassion grows exponentially. But not just compassion for other people, also compassion for ourselves. When we get to listen to ourselves in this way and thinking, right, I'm not crazy. There is merit to what I'm saying. But this other person might not be crazy either. They have a real space they're coming from.
Thank you. Does anyone else have an example, or I'll pull one out of my pocket? Well, I'll share an example that I've heard, and Bonnie may recognize this a bit. I'm not going to name names, but I think this is a common experience where we can get very enthusiastic about our idea and our program or the action that we want to take, but perhaps we don't do adequate preparation with the people that we're looking to for approving that action, such as, I would like to do this thing in my church, endorsing a policy or a statement that IPC has made about the environment, and I take it to the Ad Council and I present it. But the council decides, no, we don't need that, and they reject my idea. I haven't talked with any of them other than I got on the agenda. And I'm able to talk to I have airtime at the meeting, but I haven't done any legwork in advance to prepare them for this decision.
And I think it's great. It actually connects back to what Nancy was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this piece of trying to, like, we're skipping steps, right? Like, in geometry class, how you could look. I didn't do well in geometry. I skipped because there were things that seemed obvious to me and made sense. And I was skipping all of the steps. And it's the same thing here. If people are, if we're coming up with a solution and we know in advance, here's what it needs to be, but we haven't held space for other people's concerns or given them the benefit of hearing where we're coming from and the full context, it's less likely to sail. And then we're in a position of competing. Now you're competing. And so thinking about erring on the side of collaboration, like you can have an idea of some of the solutions that you think might be helpful, but to be able to go into it and say, here's some of the concerns in terms of the environment, and here's part of where I feel like we're responsible, and here are the connections that I'm hoping that could get made in terms of education. And I'm wondering, like, I'm aware that without certain legislative pieces, there isn't the enforcement and the follow through. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the, whatever the piece is, right?
Mm-hmm.
About clean waters or this pipeline, or trying to sell a historically Black college on not being left out from a social justice standpoint and allowing them to say yes to natural gas pipelines instead of geothermal, just as an example, hypothetically, if that were to happen, which it is. So if you know of anybody who wants to get on that, talk to me about it. But if you were to try and have that conversation and hold space for that and hear, like, more often than, I mean, this is part of, right now, I'm working with people who are, from healthcare facilities, from boards of education and public school systems who are saying, oh, we have a policy for that. If we commit to federal guidelines and we make sure that we provide interpretive services, and people are like, yeah, I hear that. But like when we came in and like the language line and that didn't work, or somebody used that Google app translate, that didn't. And then when I got discharged and then my instructions on COVID, they were only in English, right? And so then people are judging us, going like, how come those people aren't following the health recommendations? Well, part of it is you didn't give them the benefit of the information. So what's radically different in this is you're bringing the people who are impacted, who need to be in it together. So I would say on the front end, it doesn't mean that you can't come with an idea but if we get too far along, the solution is not necessarily going to fit everybody.
Right. The timing of introducing a policy or an idea for action or an endorsement of presenting it cold, basically, in the decision-making body that you're seeking approval for, without having had those advanced conversations or talking through what might be the limitations or how to take the steps.
Exactly.
Anybody else? Some examples of working within your team about some of the group dynamics that can happen, about choosing the action that you might take, or some disagreements about what priorities your team might be selecting.
I have something.
Hi, Ruth Ann. Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you for this wonderful time together. I really have so many reasons why I need this recalibration. So I'm very much appreciative. I think one of the questions I might ask, and I'm trying to like narrow it so I don't sound like I have thousands of questions, but I think it's related to kind of the opposite end of the spectrum that a couple people ago were asking, what if people are thinking, and they don't admit their feelings or don't want to encourage expressing feelings? I'm in a certain group where some of the people are really adamant that we spend more time on feeling. And the people that are volunteering but have other jobs, they're really, really busy people, get just disgusted, and they just end up saying, I can't spend this much time talking about all these people's feelings. I need to know what the job is. I want to know how I can help, and I want to get to business, you know. So like when you have people in a room with all these different desires for different processing, maybe some people are retired, some people are working 3 part-time jobs, some people have no kids, some people have lots of kids, but we're all in the same room trying to develop a way of being together. So is that
that's a great, I thank you so much, Ruth Ann. And there's a lot to that. I think that part of it is one really simple, I'm going to turn this other light on. Hang on one second. I was trying to do the lighting, but now the sun's gone down and it's totally changing the room. So hang on one quick second.
Sure.
Well, I've been driving, so I just have my little otter picture on until I stop.
Oh, you were the otter. I utterly love your picture. All right. Okay. So part of it is when we hear people repeating themselves, and we've all been in it. We've also probably all done it. But when we hear people repeating themselves, and we know because we're like, oh my gosh, if she says this one more time, I'm going to lose my mind, right? Like it is taking all of the Jesus in me, please. And what I would recommend is try saying back a feeling. Stay away from frustrated and angry, but like really command yourself like mindfully to work on what is that feeling that person's expressing, right? Like, I just don't even understand why this is happening. So really feeling confused and maybe kind of panicked. Is that right? Exactly. Like it naturally starts to de-escalate it. But I think the other thing that in your question, Ruth Ann, that's important, and this is why it's so important to be working on understanding what everyone is saying and then put it back on them. Like that's the cool thing when I'm mediating. I don't have to be the brightest bugger in the room, right? I just have to really be working on understanding what folks are saying. So if someone is saying, I'm really worried and I feel like nothing's getting done, and we whatever it is that, and go and like, and it sounds like feeling concerned about where we're headed, and like, you know what, I don't have time, can we just cut to the chase, can we get through this part, can we, and it also sounds like feeling anxious and wanting to focus on productivity and like the efficiency of the group. So what are the ideas that can give us both that space for feeling heard and that productivity that we're looking for? What do you guys think? And then I get the people to come up with the idea.
Good
Great.
call. Good call.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth Ann, for sharing.
Self-determination, right? One of the principles of Kwanzaa, one of my favorites, Kuji Chagalia, right? We honor the self-determination. I never was a bugger who learned well if somebody gave me the recipe for what I was supposed to do in my family, right? I had to make my own big fat mess. But it works in terms of like we follow through on the ideas that we get to help have a say in.
Mhm.
And we learn a lot along the way. Yeah. Anyone else? We've got about 10 more minutes here to share any other examples or ideas.
I'll ask a question.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, so I know Michelle pretty well, and one of the things I used to coach her son in an extracurricular activity, and one of the things I admired most about Michelle is her ability to stay calm in situations. And I'm wondering, so one of my challenges in trying to diffuse conflict is this: I have emotions, but I'm also trying to make sure that I'm hearing other people. What are some strategies for recognizing the emotions in ourselves, but keeping them sort of reined in a manner that allows us to exercise some of the tools that you've taught us tonight?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's actually was a longer handout that I didn't plague you with because, 25 minutes of just straight presentation. But I will say,
if you want to send it to us, then we can send it out with the
Sure.
follow-up email.
And it does have a piece about really checking ourselves, right? Like checking ourselves, like we have all the physical warning signs, right? Is one piece. Like I know when my voice is about to come from that ragey, cagey place in my chest, that's totally my will, right? It's my very willful, ego-oriented voice that's about to come out of my mouth. And there's a different voice that I have deep in my belly when it comes from like the seat of my being. But here's one thing I will say. Part of it, check your butt. Like literally where you're sitting in the chair. Like, you know the saying, like, we were sitting on the edge of our seats. Well, there's a lot to be said for that. If you're sitting on the edge of the seat, like you're up and you're in it. Like putting your butt back in the chair is one small thing. Like sitting back away, taking that deep breath. And it doesn't, you don't have to have the full conversation if you know. Like ethically, you need to check yourself. Like if you're like, whew, I may not be up to this task right now, but you don't want to bail out and say, all right, this isn't going anywhere, or I've had it, or worse, or things I promised Coley I wouldn't say. So you do want to be able to reflect back some of it, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're really feeling unheard and anxious for us to be able to move forward and make decisions. Is that right? And I also have a lot of concerns, and I don't know that I'm able to articulate all of them in a way that's going to really land right now. And so I'm hoping that when we come back next time, we're going to be able to pick up, and perhaps we can even do some homework and take some time to think about 5 different things that we think need to be components in whatever solution we come up with, right? But being able to table it even and know. And we also know, like, there's simple stuff, right? Like hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? Did I eat before I got into it? If I know that I was up all night with kids or, with an illness or something, not going to be the time, right? Not going to be the time. Or tagging and bringing somebody else in. So I think that there are those pieces in it of just like sitting back, taking the breath. I also, to come into space, I encourage, some might say torture, but I like to say encourage my co-mediator. If I know I'm going into tough space, like before a mediation, we do the plant your feet firmly, stand up, right? Roll your shoulders back, drop your arms down, and like a nice deep breath. And I take 4 full seconds to take it in and hold it for 4 and 4 to release, like a square breath. But I do it 4 times. And so it's this amazing thing that if we, no matter what else is going on, like really being able to check that space. The other piece is if we're listening, like I do the grid, it looks like I'm doing crosses on my paper. But if I do that line down, line across, and in one quadrant, I'm writing all the feelings I'm hearing. And I do one of those grids for each person at the meeting. And I write in one quadrant the feelings I hear someone expressing. And in another quadrant, I write the values, right? When it's, you're disgusting, you're such a slob, right? I know cleanliness. I write that down as something that's important to someone. And then in the third of the 4 quadrants, I write topics. So it might be room, car, whatever it is, housekeeping, writing those down. And the 4th quadrant up at the top, I use for questions. He's an idiot. So I write idiot. Not because I'm going to say, so earlier, Matt, you said he was an idiot. I'm going to say, help me. Earlier, you said something about idiot. Help me understand what you mean by idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't do ground rules. I don't say, whoa, we're not going to talk like that. Instead, I work at understanding and I unpack it. Because even if it does seem like offensive language to me, there might be something really significant and important in there that I'm going to miss. And if it goes unaddressed, could be the seeds of conflict that are just going to blow up later. So if I'm focusing on that grid, if I'm putting my butt back in my seat, I'm doing the deep breath, and I'm working on understanding feelings, values, and topics, it's a lot harder to incite my ire because I'm spending a lot of energy working on understanding. And it just helps to create a different momentum.
That's great. Thank you. That gives us some exercises to do when we're in the heat or anticipating being in the heat. Yeah, Bonnie, I was going to chime in, but go ahead.
I'm asking this on behalf of one of my beloved congregations. No one from this congregation is here, and I'm certainly going to suggest that they be in touch with you. But I think it's something that people in other congregations probably experience. That sometimes we have people on our committees that are so either negative or unpleasant that it ends up making people not even want to come to the meetings because that that person's going to be there. I don't know, like, can you give us some suggestions on, is that like you need to have a one-on-one with that person and find out what's going on? Like, well, how do you handle that? Because literally we've had committees like stop meeting because they knew this person was going to come and they didn't want to have to confront with that person.
Yeah, so I would say thank you for that. I would say there would be a variety of pieces. And part of it is when we're thinking about, I mean, I feel like the majority of what I get called in for is like the toxic personality, the toxic environment. It's just a personality, like it's a personality thing. And the reality is we can still work at separating the person from the problem, right? And so if we were to ask ourselves, if we were to employ these skills and say, when someone is there any way without feeling like you're betraying any confidentiality that you could give an example of like a statement, a negatively based statement that you might hear from this person?
Actually, Jody worked with this group more than I did at our last session, so I don't know exactly. I know that there's nobody here from my congregation. Just a person that was like, that's never going to work. Like what you think?
Yeah,
we tried that,
perfect.
But that's never going to work. We tried that. That's never going to work.
Excellent. So I think if you were to say, and it sounds like you feel doubtful and even experienced around the success of it, help us understand a little bit about the pieces when you guys tried it before, what you felt hopeful about, and then kind of what shifted, right? Like sending that message of I'm going to work on understanding what you're saying and unpack it. And then maybe it's about, well, it ended up being too expensive, or I was the only person who even did any of it. Well, and it sounds like you felt really alone in it. And if we were to be able to try something like that moving forward, really wanting there to be involvement and a balanced workload. Is that right? And it also sounded like the affordability of the event is something we would need to take into account. So I would try some of those strategies, but I also would say, and there are a variety of pieces, like your local community mediation center can provide mediation, can provide facilitation, would do like what I'm talking about in the room with that person and others. There's also opportunities to do, like we design and tailor fit for groups. Well, we do the other stuff for free. We design and tailor fit like fee-based service, but it's a conflict management training for groups and organizations to be able to have more in depth with that skill set. I would say my experience is that the person, the defensive person, and the person who's you feel like is so negative, approaching just that person and making them the problem is not going to de-escalate the situation. Yeah. Right. But to be able to even say, I feel like there have been challenges around attendance and I want us to be able to move forward, and we're going to try these other pieces to make sure all the voices get heard and that we maintain the momentum. And part of that is about, you know, when I've done other trainings, it's tough. Like we don't want to lose the masses, but at the same time, like especially in faith-based efforts, right? We do have this piece that we have never been taught to say, okay, leper, once you're totally healed, then come. We say come, right? And so meeting people where they actually are, but sometimes we need help with that, right? Sometimes we need support, and that's not shameful. Like that's, I mean, I've been doing this for more than 25 years. So there are people who have given the same way you're giving the gift of service that you are. There are people who have given that gift of service to support these conversations all over the state. Like when we first started, there were like 4 other community mediation centers. There was no, people were like, the World Wide Web, have you heard of it? Email. Do you think it's going to take off? Right. And we met each other. We wrote letters. We thought we were doing some really big stuff when we like faxed each other. But we met and found out the other ones existed. And then we were like, oh my gosh, you're doing this on the other side of the state. That's amazing. And it was like this little match, like, please don't go out. Please don't go out. And we put all those matches together and we built this statewide organization so that other mediation centers could get born and could grow across the state. And there are people who get up early and spend their weekends going through 50 hours of training and apprenticeship to be able to be there for you, to support you and your groups being as effective and as inclusive as you can possibly be. So use it.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour here, and thank you so much, Michelle, and everyone else for all of your great examples too. I know we could be here for at least another hour with talking here and unpacking some more examples, but I think we've gotten a great start. You've given us some tools to share, and I'm going to close us out here with just a moment. I'm actually going to move to our last slides here and let you know that, of course, this is all part of our Faithful Green Leaders training. And those of you who have not participated in the Green Team trainings, we'll be having our next one, which is all gone virtual, in February. So beginning February 11th, we'll have another series of trainings for 3 consecutive Thursday evenings. And it's another way to equip your team to be more effective and take action for caring for God's creation. And thank you, Michelle, for alerting us to all these great resources. And I want to just say thanks to all for coming.
Thank you all so much for having me. Take care of yourselves and one another.